Thank you. Good morning. Today we're going to talk about how Gunnison implemented Laserfiche Forms and workflow to automate our Board of County Commissioner agenda approval process. We're going to go through the process before Laserfiche, the process we took developing the solution, what our solution looks like today, and then some takeaways and questions. I'll take questions anytime if you have them during the overview, though. So this process is to get items approved by the county commissioner. It needs to be approved by the attorney's office to make sure contracts meet state statutory requirements, county guidelines are enforceable. The finance needs to review items to be sure that they're within the approved budget, or if they're not in the budget, where the additional funding is going to come from. The county manager to verify that what's being requested or discussed is within the strategic plan of Gunnison County, and then additional departments as they bring expertise to the system. So our process before Laserfiche and workflow started with an Excel spreadsheet form that the departments would download, fill in the information that was requested in the form and print it. Often departments would print the blank document and handwrite the form and then send it on to the clerk of the county commissioners, where the clerk would verify that the supporting documents were attached, determine if review needed to be done by finance and attorneys' offices. And then the clerk would start this stack of paper with the agenda submittal to the departments that needed to be approved. This would be transferred either through inter-office mail or hand-delivered. After the finance and attorneys departments completed their review, it would be sent back to the clerk for additional processing. When the reviewed submittal of documents came back to go into the board packets, this is one of the cleaner ones with handwritten notes, stamps. Some of them you'll see, they're fairly ripped up sometimes as they come through the process. Notes along the sides, and this would actually get scanned and be what was presented to the public for the public meetings. So not a very professional looking document. Also what we found is that all of the three departments that typically do the approvals for these systems was keeping an Excel spreadsheet with the items, when it came into the office, when it left the office, and where it got routed to after that. This was really a CYA activity. So when a department was trying to find the document that all of a sudden evaporated, okay, whose hand is it in and where did it leave? And it was a little bit interesting too, because the documents didn't necessarily always go to the attorney first or always go to finance first, so it could be anywhere. So that was always a challenge. The process was sequential, since only one office could have their hands on the stack of paper at a time. If a department head or the person needing the approval needed to find out what the status was, if it was a important, they might have to call all three departments to figure out where it is, and then often chase it down if nobody could claim it. So those really slowed down the process and made it very cumbersome. I know that was a quick overview of our paper solution, but is there any questions on that? So, we're going to jump right into how we developed our solution. We had the county manager's support and directive of finding a solution. So we formed a committee. We had clerks to the Board of County Commissioner, those two. We had the Finance Department, Attorney's Department, IT Director, and our Laserfiche Solutions Peak Imaging, Jen Harris. Jen Harris is with us today, and also Ben Cowan, our Assistant Finance Director, who was one of our project champions. So we had several meetings to define the scope of the project and identify how we are currently pushing the paper around the departments. And this is what we thought our manual process looked like. What we really got out of all of this is exceptions to the process, complicated and confused the workflow, as you can see by this. From our original scope, after analyzing and discussing, we found that they were really two separate processes. For instance, a board agenda item might be a staff update for a project that wouldn't require any additional tracking, after the meeting was done. Other items might be a contract where the document would have to become paper again to be fully executed in blue ink and multiple copies. Would have to be recorded with the county clerk and recorder's office, and then often we would need additional documentation from the contractor, such as certificates of insurance or bonding. So after many more meetings and deliberation and cleaning up exceptions and taking away the contract processing and archive at the end of the process, this is what our workflow design ended up looking like. Through the whole process of the workflow, reviewers are emailed when they have something in their inbox that they need to look at or accomplish. We eliminated all the exceptions but what about this and what about that, and it's a rush topic and we got to do this. And really is what we've seen since we've gone live with the new system is there are a lot fewer exceptions. I think a lot of this had to do with just the workflow being a more efficient process. Something else that I think really helped was that when we did the training at our Go Live, everybody started understanding what the process was. And so they knew what documents they had to have up front to get things accomplished instead of, here's half the documents I need approved. And just also, it helped the submitter to understand what the process was, and that, just because they had the documents in their hand, they just don't automatically go on the board agenda. There's other reviews that have to happen. And I think that was a big part that was missing. So now our system, so this is our solution. Now, instead of the Excel spreadsheet, we have a Laserfiche form that's available on the internet for our staff. The information on the Laserfiche form closely matches what we had on the Excel spreadsheet. We have the normal things you would expect on a website, the red asterisk showing things that are required, all the information that they need to fill out, drop downs so they can't select the wrong thing. Well, they can still select the wrong thing. One of the things that has been a little bit interesting for people that is explaining to them that what they type in here is what actually gets printed on the agenda form. So, like capitalization and punctuation and spelling are kind of important. Also, at the bottom of the form that the submitter puts in is a place to upload all of their electronic documents and contracts that support what needs to get approved. And then once they click the submit button, it begins. So again, this is our workflow as it was implemented. That top box is the submitter putting in the form. It then goes to the department heads for that department for approval. What we found is sometimes department heads, somebody would be in a rush, put in a contract that was last minute. Somebody would question the department head about it, and it's like, I don't know anything about that. what are we doing? So now the department heads are part of the beginning of the process. Once the department head has approved it or denied it, well, approved it, it goes to the clerks, much like the paper documents did before, that verify that the documents have been uploaded, that they're readable. They still make the determination if finance and or the attorney's office needs to review the documents. After the finance and attorney's offices have completed their approvals, it goes back to the manager's office. The county manager approves it, and it gets assigned an agenda date and time. All the way through the process, reviewers get email notifications that they have something, a task that they need to get done. So this is an example of the email that the department head gets when an item gets submitted. In the email, we include the web access link, the mobile link, and also the LFE file attachment. This allows the department head to do their approval on whatever device is accessible to them. So we have a number of departments that are not on the county network. They'll be on the state network. So this gives them access to it. Also, as department heads are traveling at exciting conferences like this, they can still get their work accomplished. And then once the department head approves it, it continues through its workflow. When we implemented the system, all of the reviewers, being each department or the attorney's office, finance office, has a folder in the Laserfiche depository where links to the agenda items for approval are stored. So they've got one place to get to everything that may need to be done for that department. And then within the folders, all the documents are in one location, so the reviewer has everything they need and can pull it up on the screen and read it. They don't have to print copies or find the copy. The reviewers can also upload any additional documents that they need. We did give space in the folder. Let's see, I'm getting ahead. If a reviewer wanted to add a memo or another letter, they could upload that. So for additional information. So this is part of what our folder metadata looks like. This red section, each department has one of these approval areas where they can put in notes that they've reviewed it, they've approved it, they've reviewed it, and the commissioners should absolutely not sign this contract, whatever they want. So there's also a section, the second box down for the attorney is return to submitter. If I, like, for instance, if I've put in a contract and the contract does not include the specific language that he wants or the insurance limits, he'll send that back with a note. I'll get an email saying that I need, with this information, provide additional information. I'll update the information, change the contract, whatever is requested. I'll email that back. That goes back to the attorney's group, and then they can verify that the change has been made and upload the corrected document into the file folder as a new version of that contract. So we also have the history of how it began and how it ended. Also, with the metadata, this gives the department heads, without making phone calls or running to different buildings, they can come in and look at this metadata at any time and see the status of it, any notes that have been put on the process through the review or not. Also, the business process screen can show the department heads or processors where the status of an item is. It also tracks for us how long items take to get through the process. So, and I suspect on this one where it says 3 days and 4 hours for the processing, that was probably, they started it on a Friday and finished it on a Monday. So the 3 days is really 1.5 days. So, but that's been helpful for some of our analytics of seeing where some of the slowdowns are. Once an agenda item gets approved through the process, the submitter gets a notification that it has been approved and what date it has been scheduled for on the agenda. So they, once, as this was a contract for me, once I know I've gotten this, I don't have to think about this contract anymore. It will go on the agenda and more than likely get approved at this point because since it's met everybody's process. This is the bottom half of the email. It also includes all of the notes that were put in along the approval process. You'll notice that the finance office did verify that it was in the budget, so I'm not spending money that I haven't accounted for ahead of time. This is the agenda submittal item now that gets generated at the end of the process through Laserfiche. You can see no handwritten notes, no date stamps, much cleaner document. It has all of the comments from the approvers or reviewers. So now this is what goes out to the public instead of the original document we saw. So some of the takeaways from our development is one thing we really found is the group of people we had on the team and the people in the office had very different perspectives of what happened with the document. The bosses seemed to think that just automatically happened without any intervention. And I think that's why we had so many exceptions and our original workflow was just kind of a spaghetti mess. Make sure that the decision makers are involved in the process or getting updated of where we're going with this. We had some of this confusion between department heads and the processing staff really caused some changes in our workflow process and how we handled things late in the development process. So it kind of slowed us down and was a little bit frustrating for everybody on the team. When we implemented the process, we rolled it out with just the county administration, county attorney, and finance offices to build confidence in the system and just to get everybody used to a big change. We ran the system in different forms for 6 months. Once we finally got the workflow and everybody comfortable with how we had it designed, we scheduled the go live. And that was about a year ago that we did the go live. It was in January last year. We scheduled training the week of go live for the submitters and the departmental approvers because at that point they had not seen the system. And in the training sessions, we spent a lot of time just talking about the workflow process, filling out the Laserfiche form. A lot of users don't need a lot of training on that. But we really spent time on the process, and so the submitters understood everything that had to happen on the back end once they got, the submitters want to hand that document off and have it approved and hand it back to them. So having them really spending time with talking about the workflow really helped get their perception in perspective in line with what's really going to happen with the process. And one thing I didn't really realize, it kind of came to me after the fact, is since we deployed the system in 2 different rollouts, one for the reviewers, and then later for the submitters and department heads, is we had staff in two different places in the change management cycle. You know, we had our reviewers, they were comfortable with the system, they knew how to use it, and then we threw the submitters and the department heads into a new system, and so we had departments in two very different places of accepting the system. And I didn't really pick this up until after the fact, and I was in an IT directors conference and they were talking about this. And looking back, I can see the signs now, and hopefully I'll see the signs in the future. So anyhow, don't forget that along the way. This is a quote from our finance director. So I love that she says going back would be very painful. And as Katie had mentioned, we have uploaded this solution to the Solutions Exchange, so you can download it. There's additional documentation for our workflow there. And that's my presentation. Any questions?
I got a bunch because I'm working, when I get back, I'm on a contract system, and I work for a city. It's similar.
Yes.
So I've been attentive. Now you had, when it went to the attorneys and they made their changes, was that in Word documents, or how did you store it? I noticed the folders where you had all the documents. Or was that TIFF?
We let the submitters submit it in about any way they want. I tend personally, and we recommend that if it's not a signed document, to submit it in a Word document, and then they can make the changes that they want. You know, we had, I think it was a year ago, we had a change in our insurance limits because of state statute. So it was really a very small change in our standard contract that had to be made. But if they submitted that as a PDF, then it had to go back to the department head to make that change, to where if it was a Word document, the attorney's office could have just made it.
And then did you have trouble with the department heads approving, or did they do, I mean, did you have, or they knew they were being watched, so they were good? Because, you know, they're all over the place.
Yeah, no, they are very much all over the place. And with county government, we also have elected officials that don't have a boss, so.
Yeah, they're prima donnas.
You know, we still have some problem with the department heads.
Yeah.
But the process does not move forward until they do their part, and they know that, so.
And are they the first in the process, or?
They are the first in the process.
That's how I was wondering how that goes, but okay.
So, but, you know, we made it clear to them up front that until you do this part of it, nothing moves forward, and this isn't going to happen. So, but we still have the occasional that they'll call the county manager's office, the clerk to the board, and she will push it forward for them.
So once it gets on the agenda, if the commission rejects it with some changes, do you start all the way over, or do you have a process to kind of, or it all depends on what they say?
Really depends on what they say. I don't know that we really encompass that.
Okay. And then you had that audit trail up there showing, how did you get that? Like the people approving, how long?
This?
Yeah.
That is just the business process function within the Laserfiche workflow.
Okay. And then one more. Okay. Once they're completed and then they're signed, I know that's a bit, do you guys, I mean, it looks like you just went to the agenda and they approved it. Do you keep the completed contracts and people can do searches on that, or is that a big deal where you work?
It is a big deal. That is the next phase I hope that I can get our attorney's office to move forward with.
Yeah.
So they are available. The contracts that have been submitted are available. We don't delete them out of this process. So a lot of departments use them to go back and search on those to find what they're looking for, even though it's not a fully executed. Typically they know that that's what got executed.
Yeah. And then I think we sign them and then we're going to rescan them in the signed. And then we put a date on there, and like 3 years from now, like 6 months out, then we will something to notify them, because where I work, we're losing money right now on contracts. Like they wait till the last month, and it takes 3 months to get through, and we're losing money. So that was a big deal with the system I'm working on, is to be far out, get the legal guys on board, get everybody proven. So
Yeah. And that's a challenge we have also, and that's part of what I hope our next phase is. Just because, like, you know, for the insurance office to or the attorney's department to keep track of when certificate of insurances expire. So we don't have a contractor on site that we haven't verified that there's insurance.
yeah, where I work, we collect $1 million a year, like our airport in our city. And I went downstairs as I was doing my collecting of information, and I asked the one guy, I said, how do you know when they come due? And he's an engineer, and he goes, it's all up here. And I said, that's why we're losing money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is a big thing, because cities lose a lot of money with contracts from, like, your process you showed. So, okay, thank you.
Yes.
So basically, you're gathering the information in Laserfiche, utilizing the workflow, but what actually creates your agenda?
The clerks actually create the agenda.
And they do that in
like,
Adobe or?
Word, and then it gets published along with all of the, they pull all the PDFs out of the Laserfiche folders, and it becomes a PDF portfolio document.
So, have you guys ever considered using Agenda Manager? I'm not a Laserfiche salesperson or nothing, but have you ever used?
We looked at some, and it was a challenge to get the clerks to go 2 steps at once.
Okay. Well, we utilize Agenda Manager, and we actually have the department submitting. So they submit, and then we have 4 or 5 AAs that actually approve. And then when they actually publish, they actually create the agenda on the fly. So Agenda Manager is a really good tool to actually do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we couldn't make that leap with the staff we had.
Partly answered my question, because I was asking, or was wondering what the public sees in terms of the documents. But at one point you said this is what the public sees, and it was like a summary page. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this is like the cover sheet for the contract. All the supporting documents go with this header page. And this just covers just the reviewers, the notes from the reviewers, just so the commissioners have a brief description, just verifying that it has been approved.
So more of an in-house public?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the PDF portfolio that goes to the public.
So the documentation for would still go on?
Yes.
Mike, my question is, your department heads, when you do the approval, is that through a Laserfiche Forms, or are you doing it through a workflow? And then how are you identifying, like, which department head should approve that contract?
So when the submitter is filling out the first question up here is the department that they're submitting for, and that determines who gets notified that they need to do an approval. They are then going into, the department head then goes into either the Laserfiche web access or the client. And then, I don't know if you can see it, but on the form metadata, they have a box that they need to drop down where they've selected that the item has been approved. The department head does. So.
Hi.
Hello.
You kind of touched on it in your presentation, but I'm just wondering, I also work for county government, and to go from paper to an online form, what would you say was, it's kind of a 2-part question, what was the biggest roadblock and how did you get over it? And also, what was the key element of getting this implemented?
You know, I think as far as the users switching from the Excel spreadsheet to the form, that was pretty easy once we got them the link. You know, most users are pretty comfortable with a web-based form, so that didn't seem to be a problem. One of the bigger challenges for some of the submitters was trying to figure out how to, where is the document in my computer and how do I drag it to the form? So that was a little bit of a challenge. And then as far as the biggest hurdle for implementing this was probably getting the attorney's office to let loose of paper.
Okay. So did you have, with the key element of just getting this approved, this whole process, I mean, did you have a lot of support from like commissioners, elected officials? Was that a problem,
Well, we had a lot
is
of
that how you-
support from the county manager.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And his desire, one of my job requirements was to implement something in document management.
Okay.
So that's kind of why I was pushing for this. We did have the county manager pushing for this. And I think everybody all of the reviewing departments understood that this process was not good. And so it was just a challenge, not a challenge, but it was a long process to design and implement the system and demo it and show them that it could work and save them time.
Thank you.
How are you handling parallel reviews, like between the finance department and the city attorney's, or not city, but the county attorney's office? Like if there's, how do you keep them from making conflicting changes or comments? So, or is that just, they just kind of work it out during a period of time? And
Yeah, I don't know. Ben, do you have any insight on how you guys handle that?
We do work it out together. We're still a small government, and so with the concurrent review, occasionally we make changes to the contract that, in finance makes sense to us and doesn't make too much sense to the attorney's office, and we just make sure that they're aware that we've made changes and, do they agree with these? Usually they're not substantive changes, so before we used to review in finance before the attorney's office because the attorney usually was making more language kind of changes, and we were just making sure that the budget was there, and if it wasn't, what kind of resources had they identified to fund that contract or proposal. And then we'd always blame the attorney's office when it was hung up. So yes, we do work together. It's not a replacement for the human interaction. What we're trying to do is just make sure that we know who's on first base, that we have an archive of the changes that we made. The versioning is helpful, so we can see all the versions of the contracts as they kind of went through their changes, and it has been very helpful for that. What we're just using is we submit the changes as the same name, save it into the folder, and it asks to save it as a new version. So when you save it as a new version, we have a column header that we put in that folder that says whether there are versions for that document, so you know if there are versions. And then you can use that versioning tab, and there's a place where there's a comment there, and you can say, I made a change to the insurance requirements, or the grant match wasn't correct on this contract. This new version has that corrected, figure in there.
Hi. I also work in county government. What kind of a volume do you see with your agendas? I know for us it ranges from something that's very small, from like a small 3-page agenda, to year end, which can be a 30 or a 40-page agenda. And then also, it sounds like your contract review and your agenda submittal are concurrent, like they happen all at the same time. How would you see this process going if you had a parallel contract review process?
Well, I guess as far as just the size of Gunnison County, very seldom are our agendas more than 2 pages. You know, I think, you know, a big meeting will have 12.5 contracts plus other topics in it. So, you know, volume-wise, we're much smaller. And as far, I guess the other question as far as the agenda.
Sorry, it sounded like your agenda review and your contract review are concurrent. They all happen at one time. And I was curious if you had a separate, you know, you have agenda review process and a parallel contract review process. How would you envision that looking?
Yeah, currently, if you're dealing with not, you know, we have a pre-approved contracts from the county attorney's office. So if we're using one of those for just, you know, I need to contract with a training guy to come in for a day, we can use that. If we use that, we don't really need contract review. If it's a more complicated contract, you know, typically is what we tell people is to schedule with the county attorney's office ahead of time and hammer out the contract before you get to the agenda. Because typically is what happens is our deadline for agenda is Tuesday at 5 o'clock. It has to be published at 5. Well, if you've got to call 3 attorneys and hammer out a word, it's not going to happen. So we really, again, our attorney's office is very paper-centric, and we're having some challenges getting them to move forward.
So if I understood correctly, you are not scanning or storing executed contracts in the system? Just what was submitted for approval that will be executed?
Into Laserfiche, that's correct.
So, and then another question is, there's no signatures in any of this, like the action request is just the submission through the form is considered or deemed to be the, identifying the requester, and the department head doesn't need to sign anything digitally or otherwise, and that works for the commission and everything, and with the attorney's office?
The attorney's office struggled with it a little bit. You know, I guess, you know, this is only a review process, so it's really not I mean, you know, approval is really the wrong word for the attorney and the finance, and, you know, their job is not to approve or deny an item, it is to see if it meets the standards of the county. So with them not really being on the line, other than saying we've looked at it, you know, with the fact that they have to log into their computer, go into Laserfiche and do that, you know, they're not supposed to be sharing their passwords with people. They're, you know, so in theory, a department head can only do the departmental approval. So if they're having somebody else do it, I mean, if you go back to, like here, the business process, like the bottom one there, it says, you know, Gunnison County 1/H Resize set the status to review complete. Well, only H Resize can log into his computer in theory. And so he's the only, so we've got there is tracking of who did it. And since they're the only one that can log on using their login, we didn't feel like additional signatures were required for this process.
In the notes that the different departments were making, is there a reason that you put that in the metadata versus like an annotation to the document or somewhere else?
Well, typically the notes are brief in nature. If the attorney or finance has a lengthy discussion or dissertation about a contract or the funding of it, we encourage them to do that as a memo and then add it as a document. But a lot of this, you know, a lot of it is just you know, we're trying to get a one-page summary to hand the commissioners. So when they're doing their review, I mean, if there is lengthy stuff they need to look through, but we really wanted the majority of the items. The cover sheet just needs to be a brief.
One thing that might help is this cover sheet is actually a fillable PDF that workflow fills out. So we're capturing the information we want to put in here in the end.
I was wondering a couple kind of more technical things. How many user licenses do you have? And are they full user licenses? Are they forms licenses? Or is there a mix?
There's a mix. And we have, right now, I think we have 35 full licenses.
And so are you mentioned that some of these don't have access to the same network, so you went with the form is on the internet, not the intranet, right?
Correct.
Okay. And how are they accessing that? Is that like, can anybody in the public see that form, or?
Yes.
And so you're using a public portal?
We are using a public portal. We don't have it advertised anywhere.
Okay, gotcha.
So if you don't know the form, you know, if the department head doesn't know the form name, they have to log into our intranet website to get to the link to the form. And then through our website, the intralink is not searched. I mean, if you do a Google search, you won't come up with those documents.
So pretty much they get to know about from the URL that's in their email that they got. So.
Correct. And we really didn't feel like, the form was that, you know, if the public gets a hold of it and starts filling it out, it's going to be a pain for somebody to go through and delete them, but there's no public information in there.
And when you're managing the process flow, is that being done with a workflow or with the forms process modeler? You know, as it goes through.
Right.
Like when they first fill out the form and it's going through the approval process, are you using those folder structures in the Laserfiche, or are you actually, before it even becomes a document in Laserfiche, using that modeler in forms?
We're using the folders in the workflow.
Okay. All right. That's all I have.
Along that last question, why did you decide to use the workflow approval business process rather than just starting the approval process right in forms and then storing it in the end in Laserfiche? Is there any reason behind that, or is it just what you felt comfortable with?
Yeah, I don't. Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
So when we first started this project, the forms process modeler wasn't quite, you know, it was brand new, and there was more experience with the workflow, and we didn't have that initial step of the department head approval, which probably would have made sense to keep within forms approval, because actually, to answer the gentleman's question up front, the department heads are forms participant users, not full named user licenses. So they do all their work within forms. And then it goes into the client, and we go from there. And then also we wanted to just keep a whole packet all together for everyone that needed to look everything, so it was in one concise place. So we just kind of took that approach and then added the second step after we got past that. And then also to explain, they also have the forms portal, so pretty much anyone in the county can submit without needing a named user license. Then the department heads have the participant license, and then the reviewers all have named user licenses.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just one question about the quote you showed before. Who was that within your organization that talked about just the difficulty there would be with kind of going back to the old way of doing things?
That was the finance director.
All right,
right, well, if there are no other questions, please join me in thanking Mike again for his presentation.
Thank you.
Feel free to stick around for a couple minutes if you'd like to speak with Mike individually. We'll be here. Thank you all.